Deeping fen tasted of copper and stagnant peat. Iris knelt at the edge of the black water, her fingers trembling against the damp soil. 5 yards away, Julian crouched, his university satchel ruined by mud, his glasses smeared with bog mist. They hated each other. For 3 semesters, they had fought over the Department of Folklore grants, trading quiet insults in the library stacks. Now, they shared a single flashlight with a dying battery. "If Clara is dead," Julian muttered, his voice shaking beneath the heavy canopy of dead willow trees, "I am blaming you for dragging her into this thesis topic. She came because she wanted to prove the Toadmen weren't just local folklore," Iris snapped back, though her throat tightened. "And you came because you wanted to publish first." Clara was somewhere out there, deep within the marsh. The cult didn't use modern tools. They practiced backward magic, unraveling chants, walking against the current of time, and dragging victims into the mire to reverse their biology until they belonged to the fen. A wet, heavy thud echoed across the water. Then came a sound like breaking bones, played in reverse. A wet snap, followed by the sickening inhalation of breath. "They're starting the rite," Iris whispered. She stood up, gripping a heavy iron fireplace poker she had looted from a farmhouse miles back. "Move." Quietly. They waded into the freezing muck. The fen swallowed their boots, pulling at their ankles with cold, gelatinous fingers. Every step required brutal effort. The fog grew thicker, smelling faintly of old iron and wet skin. Ahead, torches flared with a sickly green flame that cast no warmth. A stone circle rose from the peat, ancient, jagged monoliths, covered in symbols carved upside down. In the center lay Clara, bound to a slab of slate. Standing over her were figures draped in hooded cloaks made of dried lily pads and bloated toad skins. Their leader chanted in guttural syllables that rasped backward, the words sticking to the roof of the mouth like dry ash. One of the robed figures held a long, rusted bone needle, pressing it against Clara's chest. Clara's eyes were wide, fixed on the sky, her mouth moving soundlessly. Julian grabbed Iris's shoulder. His face was pale, devoid of its usual arrogant smirk. "We can't take all 6. "We don't have a choice," Iris said. She didn't hesitate. She charged out of the fog, screaming at the top of her lungs, bringing the iron poker down hard against the nearest cultist's skull. The man dropped instantly, with a wet crunch. Chaos hit the clearing. The remaining toadmen turned, their faces obscured by crude masks sewn from animal cartilage. Julian leaped forward, tackling a second cultist into the knee-deep mud, driving his fists into the creature's ribs with frantic, desperate strength. Iris sliced through the leather bindings tying Clara to the slate. Her best friend gasped, coughing up black water, her skin ice-cold. "Get up!" Iris pulled Clara to her feet. Behind them, the leader of the cult let out a shriek that sounded like tearing metal. He lunged, his long webbed fingers reaching for Iris's spine. Julian swung his heavy satchel, packed tight with heavy leather-bound research books, smashing it directly into the leader's face. The man staggered backward into the green fire pit. "Run!" They didn't look back. They plunged blindly through the freezing black water of Deeping Fen, guided only by the dying beam of their flashlight, while behind them, the backward chanting dissolved into frustrated, wet wails swallowed by the dark. The cold water clawed at their shins, each step a struggle against the grasping mud of the fen. Iris half-carried Clara, whose boots had been sucked off miles back into the black peat. Behind them, the green flames of the stone circle shrank into sickly pinpricks, swallowed by the rolling fog, but the backward chanting still hung in the air, a wet rattling noise that seemed to crawl inside their skulls. "Left," Julian panted, his chest heaving as he swept the dying beam of the flashlight across the reeds. "The drainage ditch should be 50 yards ahead. If we hit the sheep track, we reach the car." "She can't walk much farther," Iris said, her teeth chattering. Clara's weight was dragging her down, her best friend's breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. A heavy splash sounded directly to their right. Julian whipped the flashlight around. The beam cut through the mist, illuminating a patch of disturbed water where bubbles rose lazily to the surface. Nothing was visible above the reeds, but the smell of copper and rotting vegetation spiked sharply, riding a sudden, freezing gust of wind. "They're tracking us," Julian muttered, dropping his ruined satchel to free his hands. He grabbed a thick, fallen willow branch from the muck. "They aren't giving up the sacrifice." "Keep moving," Iris urged, hoisting Clara higher. "Don't stop for them." They stumbled out of the deep marsh and onto the firm, gravelly incline of the sheep track. The sharp stones bit into Iris's bare ankles, but the solid ground felt miraculous beneath her feet. 50 yards down the path sat their battered sedan, its headlights faintly visible through the fog. As they reached the vehicle, a figure lunged from the shadow of a dry stone wall. It was one of the toadmen, its bloated hide mask slick with bog water, a rusted blade gleaming in its webbed hand. It moved with a jerky, unnatural gait, limbs bending at angles that defied anatomy. Julian didn't hesitate. He swung the willow branch with all his remaining strength, catching the creature squarely across the shoulder. The wood splintered with a sharp crack, and the cultist stumbled sideways, hissing through its makeshift leather snout. Iris shoved Clara into the back seat of the car, slamming the door shut. She scrambled into the driver's seat, her fingers shaking violently as she jammed the key into the ignition. The engine sputtered once, twice, and then caught with a deafening roar. Headlights sliced through the darkness, blinding the creature by the wall. In the glare, the cultist raised its webbed hands to shield its eyes, before backing slowly into the black reeds of the fen. Julian yanked the passenger door open, threw himself inside, and slammed it shut, locking the doors with a sharp click. He stared out the window, chest heaving, his glasses fogged completely white. Iris threw the car into reverse, tires spinning on the gravel before catching traction, and sped backward down the narrow lane toward the main road. Nobody spoke as the dark silhouette of Deeping Fen receded in the rearview mirror. In the back seat, Clara curled into a shivering ball, breathing evenly at last. Julian pulled off his ruined glasses, wiped them on his muddy sleeve, and turned his head to look at Iris in the dashboard light. "Next time," Julian whispered, his voice deadpan despite the adrenaline, "we stick to the library archives." Iris let out a breathless, exhausted laugh, keeping her eyes fixed on the winding asphalt ahead. The sedan's tires crunched over the gravel driveway, spitting loose stones against the chassis, as Iris killed the engine. The headlights cut a harsh yellow path across the peeling paint of Clara's family garage. Nobody stepped out immediately. The rhythmic clicking of the cooling engine was the only sound breaking the rural silence, until Julian reached across the center console and twisted the key one click further to kill the battery drain. "Clara," Iris said, turning around in her seat. In the back, Clara was curled tightly against the vinyl upholstery, her knees pulled up to her chest. Her skin retained a gray, waxy pallor, and her fingernails were caked with black peat from the fen. Slowly, she lifted her head. Her eyes, bloodshot and rimmed with dark circles, focused on Iris. "My throat," Clara rasped, her voice sounding like dry sandpaper grating against stone. "It tastes like swamp water. I can't get it out." "We're getting you inside," Julian said, his usual sarcastic edge entirely absent. He popped his door open, the interior light flashing on to reveal his mud-caked jacket and the dark smear of bog muck across his forearm. "Can you stand?" Clara nodded stiffly, uncoiling her legs. When her boots hit the rubber floor mats, her knees buckled. Iris moved instantly, catching her under the shoulder, while Julian grabbed her other side, forming a human brace. They hauled her out of the car, their boots squelching against the damp driveway. The night air was freezing, carrying the sharp scent of pine and distant cow pastures. Normal country air, devoid of the suffocating copper and rot of the fen. Yet every shadow cast by the security light on the garage seemed too sharp. Iris fished a brass keyring out of her coat pocket, her fingers still trembling from the adrenaline crash. She jammed the key into the side door lock, turned it with a sharp mechanical click, and shoved the heavy wooden door open. The kitchen was pitch black. Julian swept his hand along the wall until his knuckles found the toggle switch. Fluorescent light buzzed overhead, casting a harsh, sterile glare over a spotless linoleum floor, a ceramic coffee pot, and a calendar turned to the previous month. It felt aggressively mundane, safe. They guided Clara to a wooden chair at the kitchen table. She slumped into it, shivering violently, her teeth clicking together. "Blanket," Iris muttered, already moving toward the small hallway closet. "She needs dry clothes and something hot." "I'll check the perimeter," Julian said, walking over to the back door. He peered through the small glass pane at the dark expanse of the backyard, where the lawn met a dense line of oak trees. "Make sure nothing followed us out of the marsh." "You saw us lose them at the road," Iris said over her shoulder, pulling a thick fleece throw from the closet. "I saw one turn back," Julian corrected quietly, his forehead pressed against the cold glass. "Water carries sound, and those things don't quit just because a Ford sedan goes 40 miles an hour." Iris wrapped the blanket securely around Clara's shoulders, tucking it under her chin. Clara stared blankly at the spotless white tabletop, her fingers nervously picking at the fringe of the fleece. "They were saying my name backward," Clara whispered, her voice barely louder than the hum of the refrigerator. "Before you hit the stone circle, they weren't just chanting, they were trying to unmake me. Every time they spoke a syllable, I felt my skin pulling away from the inside." "Stop thinking about it," Iris said firmly, kneeling beside the chair to rub warmth back into Clara's freezing hand. "It's over. We're back in town. Nobody is unmaking anyone." A sharp rap struck the glass of the back door. Both Iris and Julian froze. Julian's hand snapped back from the frame as if he had touched a live wire. Through the glass, illuminated by the porch light, the yard was empty. Only the wind rustled the high canopy of the oak trees, sending a shower of dry acorns rattling against the metal roof. "Tree branch," Julian said, though his jaw was locked tight. Before Iris could answer, a wet, heavy thud hit the side of the house, low down, near the foundation, sounding precisely like a heavy body pressing against the siding. Julian moved first, sliding along the counter until his hand closed around a heavy ceramic rolling pin left out on the butcher block. Iris stayed anchored to the floor by Clara's chair, her muscles locked in cold terror. The thud came again, higher this time, sliding up the wood panels of the exterior wall with a sickening, adhesive friction, like wet leather dragging against paint. "Get away from the window," Iris ordered in a harsh whisper, pulling Clara farther back from the door. Julian crept toward the back entrance, his boots silent against the linoleum. He didn't turn the handle. Instead, he stared through the small wire-reinforced glass pane at the top of the door. Outside, the motion sensor security light flickered violently, casting strobing amber shadows across the empty back patio. The lawn chairs sat undisturbed. The garden hose lay coiled in its rack. But pooled directly beneath the kitchen window was a patch of thick, black mire that hadn't been there 5 minutes ago, steaming faintly in the cold night air, dripping dark, viscous water down the white siding. A long, webbed hand pressed flat against the outside of the glass. The fingers were too long, the joints bending backward with an audible pop that carried clearly inside the room. A second hand joined the first, smearing a thick trail of swamp rot across the pane. "They didn't track the car," Julian said, his voice dropping an octave, completely stripped of sarcasm. "A water brought them here. The fen travels through the ground." From the dark yard beyond the patio, a low rhythmic rattling rose into the night. Dozens of voices speaking backward in unison, a chorus of wet, clicking syllables vibrating the very foundation of the house. Clara let out a sharp cry, clutching her chest as her skin flushed a violent, bruised purple beneath the fleece blanket. The veins in her neck stood out, pulsing against the current. "The house isn't sealed," Iris muttered, panic spiking as she scanned the kitchen. "The crawlspace vents, the old drainage pipes in the cellar." Before she could finish, the basement door at the end of the short hallway popped open with a loud wooden crack, and a wave of freezing, copper-scented air surged into the house. The basement door swung wide, vomiting a thick, sulphurous fog that rolled across the linoleum floor. The air turned heavy, saturated with the iron tang of stagnant water and decaying leaves. The backward chanting grew deafening, vibrating the ceramic mugs on the counter, until one by one, they tipped over and shattered against the floor. Clara screamed, sliding out of her chair onto the tile. Her body arched backward, muscles locking as a strange, iridescent film spread rapidly across her skin, turning her veins black under the fluorescent light. The curse was finishing what the stone circle started, pulling her biology back down into the mire. "Hold her down," Julian shouted. He dropped the rolling pin, lunging across the kitchen to grab Clara's legs, which were thrashing with impossible strength. Iris didn't hesitate. She bolted past the open basement door, ignoring the dark, wet shapes shifting on the wooden steps below. She sprinted down the short hall to the master bedroom, throwing open the door. Her target was the heavy antique wood-burning stove in the corner, and the iron poker she had left leaning against the hearth. She grabbed it, alongside a heavy cast-iron skillet and a jar of high-proof rubbing alcohol from the bathroom cabinet. She ran back into the kitchen just as the first of the toadmen hauled its bloated webbed frame over the threshold of the basement door. Its hide mask was dripping black slime, its eyes milky and sightless. "Julian, catch!" Iris hurled the cast-iron skillet. Julian ducked as the heavy pan flew overhead, catching it out of the air. Without looking back, he brought the skillet down hard against the side of the creature's skull, shattering its cartilaginous mask with a wet, heavy crunch. The cultist collapsed, blocking the narrow basement doorway. But two more pairs of webbed hands were already reaching up from the stairs behind it. "There's too many," Julian yelled, straining as he held Clara down with one hand, while kicking desperately at the encroaching hands. "Iris, she's changing. Look at her hands." Clara's fingers had webbed together at the knuckles, her skin graying into scale. The backward chant from the basement reached a fever pitch, a vacuum of sound sucking the air right out of the room. Iris didn't look at Clara's hands. Instead, she grabbed the open bottle of rubbing alcohol, splashed half of it across the wooden floorboards leading directly into the basement stairwell, and poured the rest over the fallen cultist blocking the way. She yanked a box of kitchen matches from the counter, struck one against the abrasive strip with a sharp rasp, and dropped it into the puddle. A wall of blue-white fire erupted instantly, roaring up the wooden doorframe and sealing the basement entrance in a cage of heat. The shrieks that followed weren't human. They were the high-pitched, agonizing wails of displaced water and burning peat. The creatures in the cellars scrambled backward, tumbling into the dark abyss as the fire ate greedily through the old timber. Iris dropped to her knees beside Clara, ignoring the searing heat of the flames. She grabbed Clara's face, forcing her friend's cloudy eyes to meet hers. "Fight it, Clara," Iris shouted over the roar of the fire. "Look at me. Don't let them take you back." Clara's chest heaved. The iridescent film over her skin flickered, struggling against the intense heat of the kitchen fire and the raw force of her own will. With a violent, bone-jarring gasp, Clara expelled a lungful of black, stagnant water onto the floor. Her skin flushed back to its natural warmth. The webbing between her fingers split apart with a wet tear. Clara slumped forward, completely limp, breathing heavily. Julian dropped his weight against the counter, his chest heaving, his glasses entirely coated in soot and sweat. The kitchen was half blackened by smoke, the basement entrance consumed by crackling orange flames that ate away at the foundation of the house. "We need to move," Julian wheezed, his voice cracking. Now! Iris scooped Clara into her arms, lifting her easily this time, as the weight of the curse finally lifted. Julian grabbed Iris by the shoulder, guiding them both through the smoke toward the front door. They kicked it open, bursting out into the cool, dark night air of the front yard, just as the kitchen window shattered from the heat behind them. The sprawling oak trees stood tall and silent under a clear, starlit sky. No marsh water pooled here, no chanting followed them. They collapsed onto the damp grass by the driveway, watching the glow of the fire eat the house from the inside out, not as a tragedy, but as a burning boundary line that nothing from Deeping Fen could ever cross again.